Good morning. This is Pastor Jeff Snyder. I'm the pastor of First Calvary Baptist Church in North Andover, Massachusetts. A beautiful place. I invite all of you to come and give us a visit sometime, whether or not it's in person, in the sanctuary on Sunday morning, or with it's online, like you're watching me here. I'm glad to be with you. It's been a while since we've been able to talk like this, and I'm sorry I haven't done this more frequently. I want to talk to you today about complaining. And I don't mean calling out injustice in the world. I don't mean standing up for those who are being abused. I'm talking about the day-to-day stuff, like, dagnabbit, my shoelaces are always coming untied. Or, any number of things. Small, little complaints. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 14, it warns us about this. It says, do all things without murmuring and arguing. In James chapter 5, verse 9, he says, beloved, do not grumble against one another, so that you may not be judged. Jesus warns on what comes from the heart pollutes us in Matthew 15, when we're basically falling into bitter complaint. And excessive complaint can make us feel like we're dry bones in the grave. From Ezekiel, it's an excellent illustration, where the people of Israel complain that they feel all dried out, that they feel far from God. And scientists tell us that we complain about once in every conversation. That's a lot of complaining in a single day if you're an outgoing person like myself and have lots of discussions with a lot of people. Good grief. Complaining expresses unhappiness or resentment. And the more complaining we do, the more we're going to complain, because our brain says, well, if you want to complain, I'll give you reasons to complain. It sounds like we're on a car trip with our parents when we're little. I said, I'll give you something to complain about if you don't stop complaining. Well, it's that kind of thing, because the brain starts making better connections to complaint if we get into the habit. So you can see chronic complaining actually hurts our minds. Complaining is bad for our health as well. It releases the fight or flight hormone in our body, and that drains oxygen, blood, and energy from systems the body doesn't consider absolutely vital to our survival. All that added hormone flooding our bodies increases the risk that we'll have high cholesterol, diabetes, heart disease, obesity, and stroke. Now, that's an interesting thing. Looks like you can lose weight by giving up the habit of complaining. They don't tell you that on the commercials, do they? The Bible warns us over and over again not to do this in both the Old and New Testaments, and now we can start to see why. But it's not hopeless. We can retrain our brains away from complaint. I'm busy retraining mine to get used to doing a water diet 5 days a week before noon. No solid food in the early hours of the day. Now my body and my brain, they grumbled about this at first. They complained miserably. And every time they'd complain, I'd give them some more water to drink. Every time my stomach growled, every time my brain tried to trick me into grabbing a little solid food. And after a while, they gave up on the complaining. They'd realized they're not going to starve to death. And we've been getting along better ever since. We can also follow the Bible's advice not to go around moping because we're not eating, for instance. Don't go complaining to others, but have a positive attitude. Don't give anyone any clue of what you're trying to do. I try not to talk about it with other people, and I certainly try not to complain about it. Just drink a little more water each time. And it works. This applies to complaining. Instead of speaking out in complaint, we can say something positive instead. In fact, we can challenge ourselves to respond with positive comments. I want you to think instead of what we're grateful for when we feel like grumbling, not what we can grumble about. This makes us healthier, and it reprograms our brain for positive instead of negative thoughts. Our brain says, all right, that's what you want, fine, we'll work on being more positive. Pretty good idea. And when you spend a lot of time complaining, you also don't take accountability for your own life. You don't do anything, as a matter of fact, about what you're complaining about. You've come to the feeling that the complaining itself was doing something, which it is not. It's not taking control of our own situation. It's worse than doing nothing, because we get into the bad habit of blaming others for our own problems and our own misfortunes. We stop taking responsibility for the way we're living. And this can make us super judgmental, really judgmental of other people. And Jesus spoke out against that and joked with us, said, take the log out of your own eye before you ever try to take the speck out of somebody else's. And I have a feeling that log removal can be I think that's a lifetime job. So really, I don't think we get to complain about that speck in somebody else's eye. When we complain so much, we become champion complainers, and people start to steer clear of us. We find that fewer and fewer people are willing to talk about us, which probably gives us something else to complain about, which just makes the cycle worse. The more time we spend feeling grateful instead of complaining, the less time we'll be feeling grumpy. We'll have a nice attitude adjustment. And everyone will appreciate that. People start hanging around you more. We can train ourselves to see the positive in the world instead of the negative in any given situation. For instance, if you find yourself in the hospital, you need to have some surgery, instead of complaining that you're in the hospital and other people are going to do things to you that you might not really enjoy, you can think, look at all these skilled people that God put in my path to help me through this time of crisis. And you'll feel a lot better about it, trust me. I know I used to be pretty averse to going to the dentist. I'd had some bad experiences in my childhood. Until one day I asked the dentist, before he started his work, I said, why do you do this? What made you become a dentist? And he says, well, I like working with my hands. I'm a woodworker when I'm not doing this. And it changed my whole outlook on dentistry, because there was an artist getting ready to help me out with some of the work and skill of his hands. It was an excellent way for me to look at dentistry. And it changed my perspective a great deal. When we're faced with new situations, we tend to become uneasy, we become uncertain, and we don't like that feeling. And so what do? Well, we complain about it. Instead, we need to learn about the situation, the new situation, and become familiar with it. And when we become familiar with it, we lose that unease. And we ditch the need to complain that goes along with it. Regular complaining impacts other people too. Some people judge pretty harshly. And they'll judge us if we're complainers. Oh, here comes that complainer again. Let's try to get rid of him or her. Let's try to avoid them. Others may feel that it's a competition, and they'll try to outdo your complaint with something worse. Oh, you think that's a problem? Well, I went through this. And before long, everybody's feeling pretty miserable. And it's like an infectious disease, and just about as helpful as that. Start complaining, and others start complaining, and before long, everything feels like it's rotten or going down the tubes. To show you how infectious this can be, once upon a time, I was a field director for an archaeology site, and I noticed that everyone was really grumpy. They're complaining a whole lot. And at lunch, I asked my field director, "What's going on? What's this all about?" "It's about you," she said. "You've been walking around all day with a frown on your face, and they're scared you're going to fire everybody from the way you've been looking." Well, I wasn't even actively complaining. I was thinking. My problem is that when I put on my thinking face, it's a grumpy face. It's a frown, and that's just the way God made me. And they were really scared. So I realized what I had to do. I spent the hours after lunch walking around the site, smiling, chatting with everyone, easing their minds, being a better person. And it impacted the entire crew of about 50 people. And we had a much better day for the rest of the day, and I learned something really important about myself. So, if we want to be around happy, friendly people, we need to stop complaining. We need to be grateful and cheerful instead. This story reminds us, the story of Ezekiel and the dried bones, that when we're complaining, we're not solving any problems. When we're tempted to complain about some situation, instead we ought to be looking for a positive solution to the problem and acting. We'll feel a lot better by taking positive action than we will by complaining. And if we can't find a good solution, if others can't help us figure it out, sometimes we need to let a thing go, especially if it's something that we have really no control over. No use in seriously mulling over and worrying and fretting about something you can't control. We need to be what we want others to be. As the old saying goes, be the change you want to see. Instead of complaining to others, we can compliment them. We can offer praise instead. We can turn to the person next to us and say something good about them. Tell them they're looking good today. I'm glad to see you. It will pick people up. We need to be thinking before we speak as well. And that will help stop the complaining habit in its tracks. If we can ask ourselves, is this really a positive thing? Is this a good thing to say? Am I being helpful to this person when I say this? I can stop a lot of complaining just by thinking about it for a minute. We can challenge ourselves to see a situation in a positive way instead of offering up a complaint as well. We can pray for help in this. God is always glad to lend a hand when we're trying to improve ourselves, and God will help bring us peace of mind, a little clarity. Also, we can do some exercise and find a way to relax. Sometimes we still need to complain when something is really wrong and needs to be fixed, but then we also need to act. And when we need to complain about something, maybe somebody else has done and they've hurt us, we can start, though, with a compliment. It doesn't cost anything, and it puts somebody in a more positive mindset. And we can approach it politely. We can politely state the nature of the problem. We don't make any accusations. We don't make the other person feel defensive. But we can tell them how the situation makes us feel. We can make sure to know exactly when we need to complain about something, and stick to only that. We don't go back to some wrong from 20 years ago. We don't bring up things like that, because that has nothing to do with the present situation. And frankly, we should have let go of that stuff a long time ago. And we need to end on a positive note as well. If I say, I'll never talk to you again, or I'll never shop here again, well, then the other person doesn't really have to do anything, do they? You'll be out of their hair. You'll be out of their lives. Problem solved. So, let's take a no complaint challenge together. Try to go 7 days without complaining instead of one complaint per conversation. Let's see if we can have any success in that. We can work on being grateful instead of complaining, seeing the world in a positive light, and uplifting ourselves and others when we do. We can create a complaint-free zone for ourselves, an area where we strictly prohibit ourselves from complaining. This makes it easier to complain less. Walking into the zone helps us to fight the urge. We can stop consuming sources of information that are always complaining, which makes us fall back into the complaining habit. And we can wear something like a no-complaint ring or watch or bracelet as a reminder. And when we fall into complaint, we move that object from one arm or one hand to the other to remind ourselves that we fell off the wagon, and begin the challenge again, back on day one. If we do this, we'll feel better. Those around us will feel better. And we'll be doing what the Bible tells us we really ought to do. And in that regard, everybody wins. Sounds like a pretty good deal. I hope you'll give it a try. I hope you've enjoyed this time together. I hope we can do it again real soon. So I wish you a blessed day. May God's grace be upon you. And may you have a complaint-free day. God bless you all. So long.